Hello, this is Teresa Baker with the REDCap team at Cincinnati Children's Medical Center, Bioinformatics. Today I'm going to be talking to you about REDCap, which is an electronic data capturing tool. REDCap stands for Research Electronic Data Capture, and it is a web-based application that is great for creating and managing databases and surveys. It is used to capture clinical information for research studies and was developed in 2004 by a group of Vanderbilt researchers for other researchers. The software is free to nonprofits who join the REDCap consortium, and the consortium currently has hundreds of different countries included inside it, institutions from all over the world, and many projects. Consortium partners who obtain REDCap software host this software on their own systems. The data is stored in their own internal servers, and each REDCap partner has its own REDCap support system to provide users and support. Here in Cincinnati, locally, we have many different REDCap instances that are available. Locally, we have the CCTST's REDCap instance, which is managed by Children's Bioinformatics. And we also have the UC Health REDCap, which is managed by UC Health. Typically, when you're trying to decide locally which particular REDCap that you would be joining or going with, most project investigators choose to go with the CCTST's REDCap instance. It has a fully funded and supported user management support team, and is free access at the moment through the CTSA award that the CCTST has. Individuals that choose to use the UC Health one are typically people that are taking data directly from UC Health's Epic straight into their REDCap. It does not currently support projects other than UC Health projects. Okay, so what is the primary purpose of REDCap? REDCap is primarily a data collection tool, and once that data is collected, it is stored and is capable of being exported in many different formats. So let's talk just a teeny bit more in depth into these three primary purposes of REDCap. When you're talking about data collection, really there's two different modes that the data can be collected in. You could have a study team that is collecting the data in a data entry form. Those users have to be authorized REDCap users. They have to be authenticated with an ID and a password. They log into the system, and they do not get access to all projects that are in the system. They only get access to the user projects that the person that owns that database has given that person user rights to. Everything they do inside the system is audited, and each user has to be granted access by the project owner. It's kind of like each form within can even be divided into user rights as to what you can do once you're inside that project. So not everybody has the same access level, which is really nice because project investigators can choose who can do what within a project. The other mode is a participant entry, and we call that mode survey mode. This is where a participant does not log into the system. They're given a URL. It can be a public URL or a private URL. A public one would be a generic form where when you click on the link, everybody goes to the same starting point. A private one would mean that we already know who the individual is that is obtaining that link, and we're directly inviting them to a specific survey. A private one means that we can follow where the data goes and who it belongs to. without having a user have to re-enter all of their information. Forms can be anonymous when they're in survey mode, which is great for some studies. And participants get to do their own data entry without having to be granted access to the actual project. REDCap also has some special features, such as being able to automate invitations of the survey to the participant, and some confirmation emails and automations that can also happen. When we're talking about the database storage, we're really talking about the structure of what the database would look like. There's the classic mode where you'd have one event per a record, and in this particular mode, all the instruments are available in an event. REDCap uses the word instruments interchangeable with the word form. So you can think of how many forms do I have in my study, which would be how many instruments do I have in my study. Another mode of how the database could be stored would be in a longitudinal aspect. In this particular aspect, we would have multiple events per record. You can separate your events into different arms. So if you have a control group or a placebo group and a group that is an intervention group, that would be two different arms. Once you've decided in your longitudinal aspect what events you're going to have, REDCap allows you to designate which instruments belong to which events and arms. This makes it really nice for forms that might be used over and over again across many events. You can reuse this instrument in whichever event you might want them. You can also do some special features like repeatable instruments and repeatable events. For instance, let's say that you have an unknown number of hospitalizations that you're going to add into your study design. That would be a repeatable event. We don't know when it's going to happen, and we don't know how many times it's going to happen. So we just need to have the ability to add data whenever it's needed. A repeatable instrument, that might be a really good instance for medication form. And you might ask a person, what medications are you on? And they list one, and you get to the end of that and they say, do you have any more? And if you do, then you repeat that entire section. So you can get as many medications that you might possibly want. That's a repeatable instrument. When you think about the last primary feature of what REDCap can do is about exporting the data. You've collected the data, you've stored it, and you need to do something with the data. And there's some basic features in there, some reports that are real basic queries of the database you have, so you can capture either the full data set, or you might want to do just a custom report where you capture a subset. You can do some super basic statistics in there. They do some inspection plots and descriptive statistics that are real basic, which might be useful when you're in the mode of collecting data to see where you're at a given time without having to export everything out and manipulate the data for future analysis. When it's time for you to do that next big step where you need to actually get into data cleaning, data manipulation, maybe some statistical analysis and or reporting, and you want to do that outside of REDCap. So REDCap has different ways that you can export your data. You can do it in Excel, SAS, R, SPSS, and you can for instance, let's say you chose R, it would capture both the program so that you'll be able to get all of your label data and your categorical data labeled the way you want it to, or you could go with something as basic as Excel and ask for the label data, which you're going to lose your factors and your categories then, or you can do with raw data. You can go just basic Excel raw data and get a CSV file. So the nice thing when you think about like overall, what is an electronic data capturing system doing, and in particular what is REDCap doing, is it's giving you access to REDCap in an authenticated manner. It is HIPAA compliant. It is free for any member of the CCTST. I should really say it's been subsidized. The CCTST is currently subsidizing access to it. It is being hosted by the Children's Biomedical Informatics Group, and so it has secure hosting, it has regular backups, and your data is there at all times of the day, every day. Multiple people can be in the data at the same time. You can be anywhere in the world and access it as long as you have a web connection. That's really nice for multi-site studies. Your research team can really get a database up and going really fast, and that's always super nice when you're doing PI-initiated studies. And your research team really has the autonomy to decide how they're going to set up the database, how they're going to set up the surveys, and who's going to get access to the users and the permissions and all those things. So before I go dumping in and showing you exactly where REDCap is and what it looks like, I kind of want to give you here at the CCTST, where do I start? So if you need to get access to REDCap, you start by joining the CCTST. It is free to all UC and children's employees and any partners that work within the academic partners. So you start by joining the CCTST. You would need to complete a few things before you can own your own database. You have to do the online training before you can ask for your own database. So I have some links here. If you complete your online training, you would request a REDCap access. And then when you wanted to own your own database, you could request a database. Now this is all under the assumption that you're wanting to own your own database. If you're just being asked to participate as a research staff member for someone else's database, all you would need to do is request REDCap access. You don't need to do all of the other steps. Okay, and then once you have done all of those items, you're going to want to get into REDCap. So let's take a look and see what REDCap looks like. You start by going to this redcap.research.cchmc.org. And here, let me log out and get us to the same page. The very first thing you need to know is if you're a UC student and you're logging in with your UC information, you would need to switch to the University of Cincinnati main campus. If you're a children's employee, you would stick with your children's, with the top one, Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. If you are a partner or an external to either of those two, you're going to choose the Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. You'll log in. And you're going to land on the home page. The home page is critical area to know is this box that's at the top up here. Our REDCap admins, we keep this information up to date. Here you'll be able to find stuff like our REDCap resource link, center link. You can also Google this. And right now we have on here a link to the online trainer, a link to request new users. So if you know anybody you need to get new user access to REDCap, or even access to our calendar of events. Other things that are on this home page that are important to know is there's your profile in the top right hand corner. If you ever need to have more than one email, this is where you would come and you would add additional emails in your profile so that it shows up in your drop down box for the system to automate where an email might come from. So I could come in here and I could add my Gmail account. And you'd have to put it in here twice, and then what would happen is it would send a verification email to my Gmail account. That might be something I want to do. Now if you look at the top bar here, you can see things like my projects. This is where projects that you have access to and permission to will be listed here in this grouping here. I have an awful lot here, so you'll see mine are even organized, and there's a button here to organize them if you want to. Some people choose not to do that. At the very bottom are public projects where you can play with REDCap and get an idea of how other people might use this REDCap, or how just practice using REDCap projects. There's also a button down here that show completed projects. These are your archived ones that are still available to you. They haven't been removed from the system, and they're just not in active data collection mode. Along the top row here again, there's a few more buttons. There's new projects. You will not be able to add a new project. It's a request only option. There's the help and FAQs. In the help and FAQs, this is REDCap's help and FAQs. There's some great little things for you to kind of read about in the event you need assistance. There's training videos that are put on and developed by Vanderbilt for the most part, and they are amazing. They're super short. These are the same videos that are in the online training. There's also something called Messenger. This is where you can have conversations with people on your team. I'm going to be honest, I personally do not use Messenger. And then you would not have the control center. Okay. I would like to take a moment just in this blue box to show you the REDCap Resource Center. So I'm going to open it in a new tab. This is a great location for you to find all kinds of extra information that is specific to our Cincinnati region. And we have mostly here how-to articles. How do I enter data? Right? It seems awfully basic. Oh, well, here's export data. We can pay. How do I collect anonymous data? You can click on these little how-to items and you can read a little bit more. Some of these articles come with step-by-step pictures. Some of them come with videos. Some of them are words only. If you ever find that there is something missing, that you feel like, man, you're really missing these things, just send us an email and we'll be happy to add them. We're always updating the REDCap Resource Center, and there's all kinds of information that's helpful here. Okay. Let's see if we can get back. So when it's time for you to start developing your database, I always say start at the end. And if there's no other, I call this the elephant slide because elephants have the longest memory ever. And so I say this is the most important slide of everything that I'm going to tell you today, which is these 8 steps. When you're trying to develop a database, you need to start with what your purpose in the data is going to be. From a collection standpoint, where is it going and how are you going to do something with it in? So you start by listing out what your aims are for the study, and then create blank, empty tables that you plan to fill out, whether it is going to be for a grant submission, whether it is going to be for a publication, whether it's going to be for a presentation on this particular study goal that you have. You can have many different blank tables. These tables are going to help you identify the variables that are required for you to fill into the table. And this is how you work backwards into building out what your database components are going to be. So for instance, let's say that you have a database that is a nutrition database, and one of the pieces information that's going to be needed is BMI. Well, BMI has different components to it. It has weight and height in order to create that one particular variable. So right there you already know that there is a variable that has to be divided into even more subsets of variables. So identify each of those components that build up into that table. And really think about how you're collecting that information. If I have something that is a weight, that I'm going to do a calculation on weight that I want to then make it go into a calculation for a BMI, I need to think, am I collecting it in pounds? Am I collecting it in kilograms? And do I want the participant or the person that's entering the data to be able to freehand that, or do I want to have a continuous number that they have to select a number? from an analysis standpoint, I don't want to have to clean the data too much. So I do want to think about how's the data being collected and what types of fields I'm using to collect that information. Once you've decided how you're going to collect your data, at that point it's time for you to kind of create what your questions are going to be. And after you have done these 8 steps, and before it's time for you to step into building the REDCap database itself, I think the next important step is always to build an instrument map and develop what the architecture is of your database. So think of it in really basic terms. The participant is going to step up to talk to the research person, and the research person is logged into REDCap. Now they start a form. They're going to add them as a new record, and they're going to fill in a few information because they're having an interview. And maybe they get to a certain point where they want the participant to fill some information out, and now REDCap's going to push a survey, or they're going to turn around the device and they're going to hand the device to the participant, and they want that to be in a survey mode. They want that to look in a different way, and maybe there's going to be a push of some surveys, and in what order. It's going to be this form and this form and this form, and it's going to be based on these factors. So maybe you have age forms. People that are aged 12 to 18 get this form, and people that are 18 and above get that form. Perhaps that's something that might need to occur in your instrument architecture. Eventually, perhaps a form needs to be sent off to the lab, and the lab's going to fill some of the information in. And then when it's all said and done, we want somebody, the PI in this particular case, let's say the PI, at the very end to look at that data for that particular record and accept it or not accept it for the overall study. So this is how is it going to be collected during that collection process, what things need to happen, and which order do they need to happen in. Recognizing that you're going to choose the most logical, linear pathway, the one that makes the most sense and the one that you want. However, there's a possibility your protocol or your database might have to go out of order of that and accommodate the forms not going in order. So something to take into consideration. Let's just say that you want to do this in a longitudinal fashion. If you're going to do it in a longitudinal fashion, you also need to identify during your instrument mapping which instruments are going to go with each event. So in this particular slide I have set up 3 events. And I even have the possibility of having repeatable ones. But here's 3 separate events. And here's a list of every form that could be filled out during my records entries. And I'm going to say here which form or which instrument is going to be allowed to be collected at each possible type of event. What's nice about doing this is it means that I'm starting to recognize that here, like in this particular case, the landing page is collected in all 3 types of events. This means that I might need to have some type of special branching logic or if-then logic so that maybe some fields show up on event 2 that doesn't show up on event 1 and event 3. You got to take into consideration what questions do I need to show up on every single event, and what questions do I need to show up only on certain events. That's kind of what you're thinking about here, and this is only applies to longitudinal studies. For this example, you do also want to take into consideration what is the data going to look like when it comes out on the back end. This is the architecture of example of what the participant dashboard might look like for the example I just showed you. Here we have 2 records. You can see that here, record 1 and 2. It shows each of the events. There's 5 events for record number 1, and there are 3 events for record number 2. And we even have here an instance. This means something is being repeated during visit 1. So visit 1 has 2 instances. And let's just take a look. If we come down here and we look, it looks like there's duplicated instances for some of the surveys and some of the forms during the visit. So your data, when it's time to export it all, obviously it would be filled in with numbers and values and stuff, but this is what it's going to look like on the back end. You can kind of start to think about, how am I going to analyze this? What kind of subsetting do I need to do in order to fill in those blanks in my table template? Now, I like to share at this point the different 5 steps when you're developing a database that you need to do. I'm not going to go in depth into this one. I just think it's super important to understand what's happening at each stage of designing a database. And these are all the things that you need to do in order, before you can get to the very end and you're ready to collect data and you're ready to like push data through and actually make the study occur. You have to add all of these steps in. You need to do your study design and your preliminary planning. You have to do some pre-testing. You need to finalize after pre-testing. You've got to actually collect the data, and then you've got to actually analyze the data. So each of these steps have to occur, and I think this is a really valuable table. Okay, let's go back to REDCap for a moment. Now, let's say that I wanted to actually create a database. You went through the process of going to the CCTST, you requested a database, and you were sent an email saying that you have a database. And in this case, our database is going to be called Playground. So I'm going to open it up. And the first thing it does is it lands on a page here. If you look in the center here, there's some tabs, general tabs. There's a project home tag, a project setup tag. There's some other functionality and project revision tabs. When you're in the project setup tab, it tells you what the status of your project is. This status is currently in development mode. This is, I'm not actively collecting data from real people. I'm developing my database, and the backups and the archival does not occur the same way that it does for active production status projects. If I look on the left-hand side, you can always get back to regular REDCap, back to the home page of REDCap by clicking on the great big huge REDCap logo. You can get back to by My Projects also. Underneath that is a section here for you to kind of quickly get where you need to be in REDCap. You can see here Project Home, it corresponds with these tabs. Project Setup right here. The Designer, this is the same as this tab that's down here. The Dictionary, which is the tab right here. And the Codebook, which is great for like if you needed a PDF, or if you need a list of what all the variables are in the project with their corresponding codes and where they actually fit. The next section here is for data collection. Since I'm not in production right now, I don't really need this section right now, but you could have here survey distribution tools. This is where you would get your public link that you might need to send out, or if you need to send an invitation out, you would do that here. Or if you have automated some invitations already, this is where you're going to get some notifications on what's happening. Scheduling, I don't use the scheduling feature often. It is great for true clinical trials, because if the data is not entered within a certain amount of time, then REDCap will not let the data be entered. So I don't turn it on very often, because most of the projects I use don't need to be that stringent. Record status dashboard is where you could see a whole slew of records all at once, and what forms have been completed and what status those forms are in. Add edit record, you can add your own record at this point, or you can do a data query here of the entire database and locate a record that's already in the system. The next set of Items is the applications. This is the short list. You have the alerts and notifications where you can automate some of your emails that may come and go. Your calendar controls your scheduling that we already had up above. Your data exports, reports, and stats. You can build reports here. This is where you go to export your information. Your data import tool is where you would import any information if you wanted to do a bulk data entry. You have a data comparison tool. Logging, which is your auditing tool. Field comment logs, in the event you're using that feature for logging, you can see what all the different comments are. Your file repository, every time you needed a participant to upload a file, it's going to be located here in the file repository, or if you're using like electronic consent, that's also going to be located in the file repository. So these are your users' files. Your user rights and your data access groups. User rights is where you control who gets access to the system, your project, and what type of access they get, and expiration of that status, and just all the nitty-gritties of what a person can do inside. A data access group is a little more larger, so if you had a multi-site study, you might want to say that all the users at Children's are group number 1, and these users 1 through 10 are part of Children's. And then the UC is another site, and it's group number 2, and users 11 through 20 are part of the UC group. Any data that you see that group number 2 enters, group number 1 will not be able to see. And vice versa. Any data that group number 1 enters, group number 2 will not be able to see. Your data manager can see all information though, which is nice. So this is a great feature for multi-site studies. Custom manage your locking and your electronic signature. This is very commonly used for clinical trials, especially ones that are doing monitor visits and things like that. Data quality module, where you might want to run a quick analysis to see if there's any blanks or anything that's out of your validated fields. APIs is one computer talking to another computer. REDCap mobile app, we only recommend individuals that have no access to web to use the REDCap mobile app. So if you are in the middle of the desert and the satellite is not available to you, that would be a good use. Or if you're in the basement of a community building and there's no Wi-Fi because of all the cylinder box, then that would be a good use. Other than that, we do not recommend the REDCap mobile app being utilized. Instead, you're better off going directly to the REDCap website itself. And then there's external modules. This is when consortium members across the world create the features that we might not have yet, and we can upload and do special things with them. Your next section is your reports that you may or may not have made. These are subjective. You get to choose what kind of reports you're going to make. And yeah. Then there's quick links to the help, the video tutorials, and suggested features. There's also a great big blue button here, which is very important. This is how you contact the REDCap administrator for help. And the reason that's important to do it this way is because it captures your username, the person that's logged in, the name of the title of the project, a link directly to that project, and then you can fill in your information right here. So that's very helpful. Okay, so you start by coming into a project, and the very first thing you do is you're just going to start on the project setup page, and you go straight down the form. You would start by filling in these things. Do you want it to be a survey? Right now I have it enabled for a survey. Do you want it to be longitudinal? I have it enabled for longitudinal. I can fill out my project title and stuff, and when I'm completed, I can say I'm done with that one. The next stage would be to go to your online designer. This is where you get to decide what those instruments are. You can create a new instrument. You can add an instrument. You can say whatever you want. You can check out the number of fields that are in each of those instruments. You can turn it on as a survey if you want, or you could just leave it so that it's in the database mode only. You've got special actions. if you do choose to do it as a survey, you can have the survey settings where you're going to get to choose all kinds of things you can do with that survey, and if you want to make that survey an automated invitation. So let's just take a look at this one that's already created. Here, the first thing that you get to see here is there's these fields. And this is where you develop and you create your different fields. So our first field here is called a descriptive field. It has information in it that I would be giving to the participant or whoever's looking at this page. But this field doesn't actually go into the database. It's not going to be exported. This next field I have here, it's a one-line field. This is called a text field. So, and here we have this yellow one right here. This is called a section header. You can have radio buttons, you can have note boxes, you can have all kinds of ones. So let's go to the bottom of this particular page and let's add a field. I just want to add a field right here. And the first thing I do when I add a field is I pick the kind of field I want. I can have a text box, a note box, I can have a calculated field, I can do multiple choices with drop downs or a radio button. I can also have a checkbox. Then there's a few kind of ones that are predetermined, yes, no, and true, false, which are our multiple choice radio buttons, pre-coded, one yes, true yes, yes 1, true 1, no 0, false 0. You can have a signature in the event you wanted to add a capturing in the field of a signature on a page. You can have it where a person uploads. You can do a slider. The descriptive one also allows you to upload or have a file or an image or a video, like a YouTube video or something, embedded into it. You can also begin a new section, or you can do a dynamic query SQL. If you're going to do this one, this is a request only item. So let's just say for this one that we wanted to do a drop down box. The first thing we would do is we would say what our field label is. Whoops. And we want to give our choices. So we're going to give the code of what our choice is. We're going to put a comma, and we're going to say what our option is. And you just keep doing that. And if you forget, REDCap's going to automatically give you some options. So if I click off of this, it's going to go, wait a minute here, you forgot to give number 3 to this one and number 4 to this one. So it automatically gave us some coded values in this particular case. You would need to make a variable name. It needs to be a unique name. It can never be repeated within the context of this particular project. You can do some special features in the action tags and field annotations down here, where you can default it or you can hide it in particular situations and scenarios. You can choose for things to have a max choice. You can do latitude, longitude. If you're doing a survey and you want to put it GPS to it all, or GIS, ArcGIS, or something like that. Maybe you want it to default none of the above. So if none of the above is chosen, then it can't have any of the other options. So there's all kinds of special features that you might want to do here, and that's located in this action tag. You can choose whether it's a required field or not, and you can tell whether it's an identifier or not. Really good when it comes time to exporting the information. And if you need to have a field note or anything like that. Okay, and there's our field. Okay. So this is a great thing you can come and you can play with, and creating this is really kind of a click and point and kind of thing to do. You can also bulk upload the development of your database here by looking at the structure. You can download the current structure and you can change it, and you can upload the data dictionary so that you could do a whole bunch all at once. This is an extremely advanced feature. And I don't want to go too far in depth with this, but to say that this is available. So let's just look really quickly for the one I just developed. And it is right here. So here's the variable name. This is the instrument I put it into, the type of field it is, what the label was, what the choices are. So this is the structure of my database put into a table. Okay. So once you got your database where it's up and running to kind of where you want it to be, you would come back here to your project setup and you'd say, I'm done. At which point you decide, since I said this was longitudinal, this bucket here popped up. And so I'm going to define my events now. And in this particular case, I have an event 1, a post event, and an AE. I can add another one if I wanted to. And then I designate my instruments up here. I'm going to say at this point that during event 1, I want all of these forms to be available. During the post event, I only want these 2 forms to be available. And during an A&E, I only want this particular one to be available. So I decide the architecture here, which I've already kind of chosen ahead of time. I'm just telling REDCap now what that architecture is. Go back to my project setup, and I say I'm done with that. You get to decide some extra things here, if I'm going to have repeatable instruments or auto numbering. There's all kinds of special features that you would want to play with to see what else you might want to be able to do here. But let me want to get to the user rights here before we go too far. So here, if the person that is on your team is already a part of our REDCap instance, they may already be in here, at which point you can look up their name and you can say, here is this person, and this is their user ID, their REDCap user ID. I'm going to add this person to this database so that this person has access to the database. I want them to be able to have the ability to change and modify in the online designer. So these top 3 are the critical ones. Be very careful who you give access to for these top 3. Are they going to have the ability to change user rights? This includes they could change their own. So again, another thing to be very careful. Can they create and identify who has access to data access groups? The next set of things that I would want to do, it automatically defaults to de-identified, but I want to know, can this person export my data? And if they can export my data, are they allowed to see identifiers? So no access, they can't export any data. They can enter data, they can go to wherever you need them to be able to go and see the data that they need to see, but they can't export it out. It's not allowed. De-identified means that they would not be able to see anything that was marked as an identified field, and they would also not be able to see any like text fields or note fields, because a participant could put their name in or identify themselves inside one of those fields, and so someone else needs to be able to manage that. Remove all tagged identifier means that it's only the ones you identify as being an identifier that's going to be removed, which means that unless you mark it differently, a text field and a note box field would be able to be downloaded. And then the full set means you can get the entire thing. Whether they have the ability to edit records, whether they have the ability to send surveys to people, do the calendar, import data, see the logging or the data comparison tool. Can they access the file repository? Can the individual have access to the data quality? So this is where you're controlling where a person gets access. If these items on here are not checked, they'll disappear off of the person's screen. They won't be available for the person. Can the person use the app? Can they create records, rename records, delete records? Can they lock records or unlock records? And then on the right-hand side, this will be specific to your particular database. You're going to have a list of your instruments, and you could even say, like, this person can access all of these, but this one here, this particular instrument, they get no access. And the other thing you might want to just recognize as might be an issue is if a participant fills it out, can this individual come in and edit the participant's response? So I would add this user, and now this user is located on my user list. Okay. You can also create a role. If you were like saying 50 new people and they're all going to be data entry people, you might want to make a data entry role. All people that have data entry do the same rights. That would be much faster for you if you're going to do that. And then I'm not going to explain it in this particular one, but you do have access to the data access groups right here too. I do want to show, let's see here, back to project setup. I do want to show you at this point, when you get to the test project thoroughly, what would that look like? So you might have to come over here to add edit record, add a new record, and pop right in and complete something. this record has no questions. So the next thing that happens is you get to pick like what status the record is in, and this is going to be identified by a different color. And here's your legend where you can see what the different sections are. So in this particular case, this is data entry. This is what it would look like if you were a researcher and you were logged into the system and entering data, you know, as if I had access in the system. It's the exact same questions if it's the other direction. If it's participant facing, the person doesn't log into the system. Okay. I don't want to go too far into this, because if you're planning to do REDCap, you really do need to take the online training course, and you'll learn a lot more at that point. I'm just trying to give you a flavor of what REDCap would look like. In this particular case, you can see a list of all the events. This is the data, the record status dashboard, and you can get just a real quick glimpse of all the records that are currently in there and what status, what color they're in. Again, you have your legend here to say what has occurred, what those colors mean. This is a lot of blank ones. There's not really anything in this particular database that we're looking at the moment. I do kind of want to just leave you guys with the knowledge that REDCap is the beginning of an entirely new way of thinking about how to collect data and store data. And again, if you were to walk away from here and remember nothing else about how to do this, I wouldn't worry about the details so much of the REDCap details, because you can find all of that here at our REDCap Resource Center by contacting the REDCap admins or just Googling, because there's so much information out there on how to do things in REDCap. But what I do want to just reiterate is the importance of thinking about these 8 steps for creating a database, and how do you start with that. And always start with the very end in mind, because whatever data you put into the database is going to be the quality and quantity that you've designed for it. And you know, if you design with garbage in, you get garbage out. So you know, it's the whole database mind: garbage in, garbage out. So you don't want garbage in, garbage out. You want everything going in to be in a good shape, and you want everything to have a purpose. So you don't want to burden the participants, your study team, with questions that are not going to be used to answer your study aims. So something to take into consideration. And lastly, I do want to reiterate that that blue button down in the corner is available for you to contact the REDCap admin team, and you know, just give us some specifics on what you need assistance with. It could even be as basic as I can't remember how to get access, and we are more than happy to help you out. That email is help-redcap@bmi.cchmc.org. Thank you very much for listening to this intro to REDCap, and I look forward to all of you becoming users in the future. Thank you.